welcome to Indie Book Magic, a podcast that connects geek readers and writers in an open, lighthearted, and occasionally random environment. We're your friendly hosts, Janeen Ippolito and
H.L. Burke.
And today we are talking about sex and romance. And this is kind of all your fault, because last week we asked if there were any questions about these things or if anyone wanted to stump us. And well, you know what, guys? I guess you were just too busy enjoying the Olympics and going at planning for your Valentine's Day, because the questions were a bit short supply. And so you left me and Heidi to our own devices during the month of love. So you're getting a sex episode.
Yep, that's what we had in our minds.
So it's going to have all kinds of things covered, including how to approach things and what your writing ability has to do with it, and the different levels of love and all kinds of fun stuff, because we find this interesting and we think you're going to find this interesting and have a lot of value to come away with it. And well, it's our show.
Yeah, I think we should probably preface this with some sort of PG promise, because I don't worry, this is not going to be a sex ed episode. It's not going to be an erotica episode.
Nope.
It's just going to talk about the subject as a subject more than giving you detailed how-tos. If you need those, there are places on the internet that you can find them.
Yes, yeah, that's your thing. But we are going to talk about just different ways you can approach it, different ways that you can handle it within story context, and maybe just one or two of our own little things that we cheer on or little pet peeves we have about the whole thing. So you're in for an exciting ride, right, Heidi?
I would hope so.
The thing is, with talking about sex and love and marriage, is that it has a lot to do with the individual and the person. So we're actually going to preface all of this by talking about a couple of key areas that you have to think about whenever you're going to integrate love, sex, marriage into your story. And what is the first one of these areas you have to think about, Heidi?
To me, it's your own convictions, because if you put a question online about this, you're going to get so many opinions flying at you from so many different perspectives. If you don't know where you're coming from and where you're standing on, you're going to get pushed around every which way. And this is not something you can please everybody on. In fact, I would say it's not even something you can please 50% of the people on. There's just too many different aspects of this, and everybody's got a different opinion. So you need to really, with how highly charged this is, and it can be very explosive, let's just use that term, you need to know where your convictions are so that you don't let this push you around. Because I think it comes into, I think you come from this both sides, because you can go into a secular writing thing and somebody's you're saying, well, I'm not sure I want to write this kind of stuff. People are going to push at you and maybe even call you repressed or something. Or if you go with this from an extremely conservative place, some people are going to call you sinful just for wanting to get into this topic. So you need to know where your moral convictions stand and stuff, because if you don't, I just think it's going to be way too hard to find an answer.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that, Heidi. It is an issue of your convictions, and you're absolutely right. It's not an either-or thing. People within different religious groups and environments have their own perspectives. You'll get a million different point of views. And the thing is, you're going to get point of views from other people who also feel very strongly about it. And so unless you are absolutely secure in what you're coming from, you will get pushed around, either from in one environment or another environment. So be really sure about what you're including, why you're including it, and to what degree you're including it in your story. And along with that, you should also include your target audience's convictions and comfort level, okay? Because you're writing for someone. So you may be convicted that you want to write this kind of scene, but guess what? If no other books in that genre or in that marketing area have those kind of scenes, you might be in a little bit of trouble. At the same time, if you're writing in a genre that has certain expectations of romantic heat level or sexuality, and you're not meeting them, I mean, you can, of course, go ahead and call yourself clean, or you can go ahead and try to create your own genre, or your own subgenre, your own niche, and have people find you. But it's going to take a lot more education to do that. So go into it knowing that if you're going to go into a genre that expects a certain heat level, and you are going to say, nope, I am not going to write that, expect that you're going to have to educate people and find your audience, and that your audience might be a lot smaller than smaller than you think. It doesn't mean they aren't there, and doesn't mean that they can't grow, but it's going to take a little more work on your part to do that. And that's something to consider before you go into writing your story, choosing your genre, etc. And be advised that you're always going to offend someone. Anywhere you go, no matter what your angle is, you're going to have someone, maybe the reviewer just had a bad day or something, or maybe the particular thing you wrote reminded them of something that happened in college or something. So you just got to go in there with some thick skin.
Yeah, I'm going to call this our "You Will Not Make Everybody Happy" episode, because that's going to come up a lot, I think.
Yeah, over and over again. This is, sex and love and marriage. You're going to offend somebody. So just own it.
Yeah, and I think there are certain places that you do have to be a little more careful. And one of those is if you are intentionally writing for younger audiences. I am a parent, and my daughters are not quite to that age of really having to deal with it outright, but we're getting there. We're getting there much faster than I was hoping we would. 10 years goes by like nothing. So it gets to that point where you have to decide what, because I took the girls to Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, and there were a couple jokes in there that went over their heads, but I could kind of see Corin's brain turning on them, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to talk about that.
Yeah, sometimes the jokes are often the way that it first starts. When you're thinking, what's everyone else laughing at? I don't want to know what they're laughing at.
What does that mean? Yeah. There is the concern. I've seen a lot of authors who are concerned because they're writing for an adult audience, but then they find out that a 10-year-old is reading their stuff, and then they want to adjust to it. But I don't think you can handle that. I think that's up to the parents. You cannot parent for every kid out there when you write. So if you are writing for an adult audience, this is not speaking to you. But if you're intentionally writing for young adult or middle grade, lower young adult especially, there is an expectation that some parents have that if they're looking on those shelves, the books will be safe. And what safe means is going to differ from parent to parent. But they will probably get angry at you, and they are the ones with the buying power. So I wouldn't go out of your way to tick them off,
Yeah, and I've seen that even when when I taught high school English and everything, and I would see some of my students bring certain books in, and I would be like, "Oh, you're reading that?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Do your parents know you're reading that?" Like, "No." And I'm like, "Okay, then," because I knew the content that was in that book, and I knew their parents, and I was thinking, this is interesting, because I'm pretty sure that they would not be happy.
Are you going to narc on them?
That's a whole other issue there, yeah.
Yeah. And,
but what about edgy things, Heidi?
Well, edgy does exist, and there's a certain school of author that thinks that since it does exist, and kids really are dealing with drug addiction and all kinds of terrible things, like just in their day-to-day high school, that you have to write for that. And I do think there is a purpose for that sort of fiction. However, that's not every teen's experience, and some teens themselves don't want that. Some teens have a very sense of not wanting to grow up too fast, and if you try to push them into that, it's not your job to force kids to grow up. So if you feel that you are writing issue fiction that needs to have that edginess in there to reach your audience, that's a whole nother issue. But you do need to keep yourself informed that there are some teens out there and some parents who will get upset if you try to push their kids. And on one hand, you could say it all comes down to parenting, and the parents need to be aware of what the kids are reading. But especially if you're writing for, like, I'd say 12 and under, just have some common sense about what kids, you don't need to be the kid. It's like if you were writing for 6-year-olds, you wouldn't lead off with "there is no Santa Claus," maybe a kid has to find that out eventually, but it's not
from parents if you did that. Oh my goodness.
It's not your job to decide when the Santa bomb gets dropped. It's not your job to decide when the sex bomb gets dropped. So that's up to the parents. So if they have a reasonable expectation that your book will be suitable for their young kids, try to meet that expectation. Just be good people.
Yeah, and if it's clearly issues driven, then make sure that you show that it's issues driven. So the parents will understand that and then reflect on it. And, parents out there, just make sure you're always reading everything that your kids are reading. And going on with that, there's another factor of this whole category of how to approach, the level of sex, marriage, love that you put in your story, and that is your writing ability. And this also ties into what to show, what to tell, and what to leave out. And my first philosophy with this is if you're not comfortable with writing it, don't write it. And the thing is, if you're not comfortable writing it, you're probably not going to be comfortable reading it. And that means you don't already read those kind of situations, which means you're not even familiar with how to write it in the first place. Know your own writing ability and be comfortable with your comfort level in that. Okay. If you're not comfortable with it, then just don't write it in there. And then you may say, but well, they expect it. Well, if you really have a diehard need to write in a genre that expects a certain level of heat that you don't want to provide, then you can create your own niche. It'll take more work. It'll take more audience education, et cetera, et cetera. But people, band together with other people who believe the same way you do and just go for it. But if you're not comfortable, don't do it. And if you do want to put some stuff in your books, if you want to show something more, or if you want to, get more comfortable with something, then the thing is you do kind of have to read it. You can't write something that you have no idea what it even looks like.
Yeah. And you can ask for help. That's what editors are for, or so I've been told.
Yeah, and also hopefully your audience that you're writing for, you can get some beta readers from there so they know what it should look like and etc. And also, if you tend to feel a bit restrained, like you want to write a certain level of heat, or you want to, write a certain way, but you feel restrained about that, that's where you have to go back to your convictions. You may be in a place where your convictions are different than the audience that's surrounding you and you're not sure where to go. It may be that you do need to do some research and figure out where you stand with that, or talk with someone else who has more experience in writing scenes with heat of various kinds and figure that out with them. Don't be afraid to ask questions from the right people and figure out where you stand with that. It takes more work.
Yeah, and Jean, I think that you need to if you're approaching that, you need to figure out, is what making this uncomfortable a moral stance that I have, or is this just a comfort stance? I think some people get that with even things like just emotions. Like they're not comfortable diving into that depth of emotion or that extreme of emotion, and that can be something that you might need to work through on your own. And it's similar to with the age thing. If you find that you're maybe going a little too far in the other direction, like you feel you're getting a little too hot and steamy when you're writing for teens and you want to lead back, it's okay to ask for help and moderate yourself. And a lot of people do that. Their first drafts will be much different than their last. And you go through and you look for things and ask for help and get some opinions on what works and what doesn't work.
And you have to understand that it's not just moral, it also could be relational, and that's not a bad thing. I know a well-known marketing guru out there who openly said, she's like, I'm not going to go to certain heat levels because my mom reads my books. And that is fine, okay? Own it. If you know that's going to be something where you couldn't hand it off to someone that you really want to be able to read it, then it's okay to let that restrain you. And if you really feel restrained by that, then I don't know, use a pen name or something. But again, go back to that and really think through where you stand with that, whether it's a moral thing or a situational thing or just something where you just need to learn more skills.
Yeah, I have permission from my husband to write steamy, but only if I don't use the last name Burke because we happen to share it. But yeah, I haven't done that, partially because my experience level is so tied in with my husband for that. It would feel really like a betrayal to him if I I'd feel like I was letting people in on that. They don't need to know.
Yeah. But, it's kind of just fade to black here. But that being said, there are some problematic areas that you have to deal with that are recognized as problematic no matter what heat level you're writing for.
Oh, yes.
One of the first areas that is problematic is actually one that we don't often think about, and that is the promiscuous character. And I'm going to use this, immediately throw it there, that the promiscuous character, as in the one who, is in a different bed every night kind of thing, that needs to get some constantly or they'll be going out of their mind, is different than someone who just chooses to have sex outside of marriage. And this is an important factor to show. And I see it a little more often in books that are going for the clean rating or for a certain Christian or religious rating. Just because someone chooses to have sex out of marriage or out of any kind of commitment does not necessarily mean they are promiscuous and, sleeping with the first person they find all the time. A promiscuous character is one who is often having sex to fill some kind of void in their life. They're having it because of maybe an emotional dependency or a psychological condition. Nymphomania is actually a condition, or those kind of things. And that's something you can explore in a character. But a character, can choose to have premarital sex or those things without necessarily being promiscuous. They could have their own reasons for doing that. And as part of showing all the nuances of a character, it's important to recognize those different factors and what different characters bring to the table instead of just kind of slotting them in one space or another space.
Yeah, and I think having that character who is obviously working through things, a lot of times that points to a deeper hurt in them, and you kind of need to explore that. I mean, you can't just. I don't like stories that have the throwaway, slutty girl, and then they never explain what's going on with that. And I think that's it can lead to not really understanding her, but you can also use that to break it open and give you an understanding of that character and their past and their histories. And that can make for a much more richer experience. And it doesn't feel so exploitive, like you're just using that to like up your scandalous levels,
Yeah. Let's dive into why people who are going to choose to do different things with their, with who they have sex with or when they have sex with, that says something about their whole character. It doesn't exist in a vacuum by itself. And so reflect what that looks like as a whole character. Don't be afraid to dive into that. And again, if you are nervous about diving into those kinds of characters, then either learn about it or don't write them. Okay?
Yeah.
If you're going to write it well.
Yeah, and you don't have to write them. I mean, that's not everybody. And there's so many character choices that you have out there. If you have a character that you really don't want to write, you don't have to write that character because there are 2,000 other characters to grab from, because characters are quantifiable now. And it is exactly 2,001 character types.
Oh my goodness. Now they're going to expect us to write a book about that, Heidi. Like, now we're in trouble. So what's another problematic thing that we see showing up in stories?
And this one is a lot more common in speculative fiction genres. In fact, it's almost kind of its own cliche where the 2,000-year-old guy is dating the 18-year-old girl, and that is drastic age differences.
And notice that we often now think it's the guy, whereas you pointed out, Heidi, we were discussing previously, Arwen is in fact over a millennia older than Aragorn in Tolkien.
Yeah, but she holds up really well.
But it's interesting. It says something about our American cultural context that we always assume the guy is going to be older when in fact, actually, like in one of the most well-known fantasy stories, it was the girl.
I think in modern American, in YA culture, it is definitely more common for the male to be the older one, and that's considered more socially acceptable. I know I say male funny. I've got a really weird Oregonian accent, and I will apologize for that, but I will not change it.
All the snacks. I thought you were. I thought you were spelling it that way to be cute, and then I heard you say it like, "Oh no, she actually says snacks."
Yeah, the drastical age difference is a lot of times it's cultural. In our culture, we have an idea of what adulthood is, but it's not consistent across even state to state, let alone country to country or culture to culture, especially when you get into older cultures. And a lot of times you will be writing in a medieval or a prehistoric society, and what they view as an acceptable age for marriage and, will be different. So you're going to have to deal with that. And you're probably going to tick someone off if you do that. But so tone is a lot of things, especially if you're doing where you're a world where 15-year-olds are getting married. You kind of want to frame it more in terms of courtship, I think, than seduction, because otherwise it gets really creepy, and you don't want to be creepy. Just don't creep.
The interesting thing I found with that too is it really depends on how you handle it. Because I'm the first person to be against the idea of child marriages. I know about all things that happen in other countries around the world where, girls are forced into things, but that's the thing. They're forced into it for certain reasons. And I don't think there's ever a time when you shouldn't show that someone being coerced into marriage is a bad thing. I think that's okay to show that that's a negative thing. In terms of age of marriage and seduction and those things, it really depends on who you're writing for. Are you writing for teens or are you writing for adults who can maybe understand the context more of it? Whereas teens might think, oh, this means maybe I could, go way farther with my boyfriend or et cetera, because that's what happened in medieval times. So it depends a lot on how you handle it and how it's spun. I have seen a book that handles it very well, but the idea for that was marriage was a lot about protection of the female. It was not necessarily about, again, the seduction or those things. It was about offering protection. And in the story, the book had characters who opposed that idea. And that was another thing that helped it, is it had characters who were on both sides of that opinion of whether this was right or not. And that helped it to work.
Yeah, and you have to show that both characters are of adult maturity and that they're being handled as an adult. They're not like being talked down to or, being traded and, have other people making their decisions for them. I mean, I had in Dragon's Debt, the second book of my Dragon series, the 24-year-old king is courting a 16-year-old girl. And it did work in that context, and because it's clear that he's being honorable to her, it's clear that he's not trying to get away with something, and it's clear that she's a partner to it. She's trying to talk her father into making it a political marriage. I think it really helps if you just show that there's a coming of age in this society where people are expected to behave a certain way, and making that clear what that is. Because I think our society tends to have that legally defined line, and having that defined line makes it a little easier to deal with. Mm-hmm. Of course, then you get, like we were talking about Arwen and Aragorn, you get the Peter Pan stories where somebody is like mentally frozen at 17 forever. I think that is another interesting thing that you only find in spec fic, because we're I don't know why are we so obsessed with the idea of immortality? What's your theory, Janeen?
I mean, I just think it sounds awesome to not age and die. I don't know. Like I understand it because getting old can be a really fearful thing, and I think people have different ideas and appeals about it. And I think that to really do immortality well, you do have to show the downside of it and the cost of it, which Tolkien did really well in his stories. But I just think, I mean, who wants to really see their bodies falling apart and things like that? I mean, it's hard. And we talk about doing it gracefully, and that is amazing. And I applaud people age gracefully and everything and going into that gracefully. But it doesn't, make it any less frustrating when you want to try to do something you can't,
And it's definitely more common in YA, I think. So it's probably that whole fear of it that you get more, that you don't understand it. Well, and you want to live in that golden age forever.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also with YA, you tend to get a lot more, some glamorization of it, especially on the part of the one who is not immortal. Whereas in adult fiction, you tend to see a lot more of the negatives behind it, and they're more willing to show that it is harder to connect with someone who's older than you, that if someone has a lot of life experience, it is harder to get that May December thing going on, because they may outwardly look the same age as you, but their brain is just not in the same place. And even if their brain isn't thinking like human 80-year-old, they've still just had so much more life experience. And so it can be used as a way to show the maturity of the younger person, that the older person would be interested in them, which is why it's hard to sell it with Bella Swan, because she's super immature. And so you're thinking, well, in this case, I could buy it if she was like super mature and like really at this place of unique, but that's where you have like realities of world building clashing with teen escapism in there, and that makes life a bit harder. All right. And one of the last things to talk about in the problematic category is consent. Do both people like want this? Like not even just sex, but do they want kissed? Do they want pursued, etc.? Where do how do you show that? And one of the big things about this is its context, and it's how you write it. And this is one thing I noticed when I was looking at things dealing with consent. If you are comfortable showing physical attraction, describing how the pulse is racing or the cheeks are flushing, etc., there is less of a demand to have them give verbal consent, because we're already in the heads of both sides and they're both clearly into it. But the more that you're not comfortable showing it, the more you actually have to have words being exchanged for the readers to be sure that this is a thing.
Yeah, and I think we all know that thing where they're both leaning in and they're kind of moving together, like from the kiss scene. It's like there's a difference between that and the guy just going chonk, which is a great sound effect, which should be put over all kisses. You have to use some common sense, and having a character who's able to read body languages and stuff and just mental cues is very helpful, because you don't want that where they're on totally different pages and not the other guy, and you're not respecting the fact that the other person isn't ready. That's a major thing.
Unless you are going for humor, and then you have to play it for humor, and you have to go a very different angle with it. The whole thing, if he went in for the kiss and she went, I do have a character in an upcoming story where the guy goes in for the kiss. She is not doing this, so she smacks him with a book.
Yeah, and a lot of things that we're kind of trained to think of as romantic in romance books aren't necessarily as romantic. I got my hair cut last week. It looks great. And just so you know, you can't see it, so you're going to have to take my word for it. My hair looks great. But while I was there, one of the workers at the salon got a surprise flower delivery from an anonymous donor, I guess we're going to call him.
That sounds really suspicious. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was addressed from her favorite customer, and he'd gotten her the flowers she had tattooed on her arm. So it was somebody who's a little bit observant, and she was freaked out. You know, in a romance novel, that would be totally a romantic mystery, and she would be so intrigued. But in real life, she thought she had a stalker, and she was starting to get a little bit frightened by the time I left there. And I think the same goes with what you have in fiction. Is a lot of times you have to realize that in real life, being grabbed and forced to kiss someone is not good. But a lot of times in fiction, it kind of is played that way. And I kind of want to write a thing where a guy does all the romantic cliches in a book and then gets tased or tasered.
But again, that's where it turns into comedy. You know, like that comedy has mined so much of romance tropes because, you know, comedy offers that refreshing breath of, well, fresh air that says, no, you're going to go for this. Okay, that's kind of, you know, freaking me out. Or like the thing, if I'm showing up mysteriously and telling you that I'm your destined true love through time, and she like smashes him with something because he just broke into her house. And really, what are you going to do if someone breaks into your house?
Yeah, Rapunzel knocks out Finn with a frying pan. I mean, you go, girl.
Yeah, exactly. So we can't go into a lot of detail about that thing because these are all really complicated issues, but just, you know, think about it, okay? Just put some time into it and think about it.
Yeah, and let's get back to happier things now, Janeen, because I'm a happy person and I want to be happy today. Is that okay?
Yeah, I like happy. Let's talk about happy. This is a happy thing to talk about. So what are we going to talk about next, Heidi?
We're going to talk about the levels of love.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to tackle the first one. Just throw this out there. Lust and physical attraction, aka hotness.
Yes. And I think that when I think of this, I start thinking about the cover models with the perfect abs and stuff. And I never relate to those people because I don't know anybody who looks like them. But there are so many ways to be beautiful, you know? And to me, if somebody you love doesn't find you beautiful, then that's something wrong with them, not you. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And that, I think, is something that you can show in your stories. Whether or not you want to go the traditional angle of having, you know, someone look a certain manner of perfection, I think it's totally okay to have them notice each other. And in fact, especially if you don't want to show a lot of physicality later on, especially if you don't want to, you know, if you want to do fade to blacks really early, then go ahead and show them finding each other attractive, because that will get the point across without having to do the rest of that stuff. And have them show each other as attractive as the other person is. I just wrote something recently where the guy, you know, kind of has a large nose, and she notices that, but she says, yeah, but it's kind of cute. And it's like that's, you know, that's adorable when they find even those little imperfections to be something that's cute.
Yeah, and I think that you want to avoid the swan princess trope. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? The swan princess, where I hated that cartoon so much. So many of my other kids are like, "Oh, that was my cartoon." I hated those characters so much. It's like, I know it's supposed to be a lesson he learns, that when he tells her why he loves her is because she's beautiful, and she asks what else, and he says, "What is there?" I don't really believe he ever learned that lesson. But that's the point. You want to show that happens, because a lot of times that first thing that attracts someone to them is the physical, because that's what you're presented with first. And you get that, oh my gosh, look at that guy. He's really tall, and I really like tall guys. But then you want to move beyond that to the emotion and the feels, and to show that it's something real. And you get both sides of this, because if you never show that he finds his love interest beautiful, I think you're missing something in the story. And it does feel a little bit, because I don't think I'd want to be with a guy who didn't at least once tell me I was pretty.
Okay, amen. Yes, right here. I mean, seriously, who would? Like, I mean, whether or not you want to talk about sex, you know, that is where things are leading to. Physicality is part of relationships. And if they don't find you physically attractive, you're kind of like, well, then is like kissing me going to be this chore? Like, is looking at me going to be just this terrible thing? It hurts your self-esteem.
Yeah, it's okay to love me for my brain, dude, but that's not all I've got. I'm not like in the glass jar with just my brain.
Yeah. And so, like, again, showing that in a healthy way. Of course, if the person is just loving you for that, or just lusting after you for it, then they can fit into the problematic category of, you know, this is not a thing. But it's, you know, it's okay.
It's a balance.
Yeah, put a balance in there. And with that, of course, now that we've gone past the surface level, what about them feels, Heidi?
Oh, we all love the feels. And I think when people hear this, they think sappy, but I tend to not like the really sappy emotional guys with the speeches. I like the really sincere, honest guys who just say it outright. And to me, that's where the feels are. But the feels are going to be different for different characters and different people. You have to know who your characters are and what's important to them. And some characters are romantic speech givers, some are like big gesture givers, and some are just like those little subtle guys who just reach out and touch your hand, and that means everything because that's obvious that their big brown puppy eyes are working on you.
And obviously, this can also apply to, girls too. So female characters in the same way, have them. Your female character may or may not have an ability to talk about emotions or things. Don't assume they can. I know Heidi has a character, Lotta, who, is just like, I don't know what to do here. Like, can I just make him something and then that counts? And so, it's always fun to see that variety in the male and female relationships. I'm kind of a fan of that, maybe because of my angle from it. I'm a little more like the snarky, pragmatic one in my relationship with my husband. So I do like to see a variety where the female characters aren't always, expected to be the gushy romantic types, or if they are, it's in kind of a different way than you would expect.
And I like Lotta. I mean, she's so practical and just so frankly spoken about things that she was a lot of fun to write. And I think that if you have that character who is just frankly spoken, it can mean so much more than the poetry that another character is writing. But that doesn't mean that if you have a character that wants to write poetry that they're wrong. That also can be interesting.
Yep. It's called Find the Feels and Respect the Feels.
And you have to have that based on something. I think because we all don't like the characters who are just thinking emotionally, we get frustrated with them afterwards. So there is another aspect.
I'm a little anti-drama to the point of sometimes one thing I have to add in during my revisions of my stories, I have to add in drama because feels drama is just like, I'm like, oh, really? We have to
Janeen is not a drama llama.
No, I'm not, but I have a healthy appreciation for drama and how people need to talk through feelings and everything, and I understand that. I just like, oh no, why can't we just like make out now? Anyway, but going on to one of my favorite levels of love, which is sometimes ignored, but is like one of the big things for me, is intellectual. That is the verbal sparring, the chemistry through the cleverness of words. And it makes me so happy to have that and to get to write intellectual sparring. It kind of links back to a couple episodes ago. We talked about the love-hate relationship where they're always sparring and testing each other's mettle through words. That can be a valid way to show love. That can be a valid way to show a relationship escalating. It's a really fun way to show it escalating without the characters completely realizing it, because I will be honest here, those of us who like intellectual sparring are not always emotionally aware that our intellectual sparring is related to emotions. That's where you get these two characters who like are sparring and suddenly end up kissing, and like, how'd that happen? And it's like, oh wait, we were actually feeling feels there too. That happened. I have to say, along with the intellectual thing, again, that kind of that high concept stuff, having a common future. I had a pairing show up because they both realized they actually enjoy marriage of conveniences, and they both found their marriage of convenience very, very interesting. They very much were compatible with their life goals and their future. And for some reason, that was really a thing for them to fall in love. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, well, I've had a girl fall in love with a computer, so.
There you go.
And computers are intellectual.
And so, you don't have to diss that. That can actually really be fun. You see it often in like odd couple pairings where like one of the pairing is very like pragmatic, and so they're like, well, this works, and therefore, sure, I will love you. And the other person's like, but no, what do you feel? And they're like, what do you mean? This works. This makes sense. Therefore, I will marry you. And like, but where is your deep emotional romance? And the person's like, what? And it's people who value two different things coming together, and it can be really, really fun to play up in terms of chemistry and everything, and just fun things to include.
Yeah, and of course, we talked about love, and Janeen, what comes after love?
Well, very often marriage, unless you kill off one of the characters before they get to that point.
Oh, you evil writer, you.
I'm just being honest. I have not personally done this, but it may happen in future books. I make no promises. But yeah, marriage / bonding. And this is where we're going to like pull out our spec fic flags on you. because in a contemporary context with marriage bonding, all the cultural stuff, it goes into a different angle. You have to do a lot of research. You know, if you're actually going to show different cultural prospects of marriage, you have to like research what it looks like in that existing culture. And we're talking more about what the things you can make up in your fictional culture. So we're squarely in the speculative fiction category, talking about how you can show or indicate love or marriage bonding in your world building.
Yeah, I was so disappointed as a teenager trying to write like romance when I found out you can't just go and get married in a drop of the hat in most states. There is a waiting period. And that kind of thing really gets in the way of creative storytelling.
And you have to do paperwork. Like you have to wait so many numbers of days, and you have to find like, you know, a clergy or at least a ship's captain or something, and
show ID and fill out. You have to like tell all this information about yourself. Like there's a story I like to tell. My husband is, I think, 1/8 Blackfoot Indian, but he likes to put Native American on his paperwork, even though he's mostly white. And so at our marriage ceremony, I saw him when we were filling out the paperwork. I saw him tick Native American, and then the clerk didn't even look at the form. He just put Caucasian on it when he was filling it out on his side.
Oh man.
But yeah, there's a lot of paperwork in modern America and modern American marriages, which I don't think comes in with the fate bonding we're about to talk about.
And the fascinating thing about this is that with speculative fiction, you get to cut right through that, and it is okay. And again, if you're the kind of person that like, because of your like your religious belief, your moral beliefs, your audience, whatever, you need to show marriage in a certain way, Lord love you, go ahead and do that. But the point is, because of speculative fiction, you have ways of showing marriage in more unconventional ways. And I actually find that to be a fun thing to do in speculative fiction. You can have fate bonding, where, you know, it's a spiritual bond or psychological bond, or like, you know, destined from birth to find each other bond, or we just had to share energies in order to save the world, and now we're stuck together because we can't unshare them bond. And I like those because if you treat them as a kind of marriage bond, it can be really fun to have these two people being stuck together and having to figure out how to work together. It becomes really, have a lot in common with a marriage of convenience, or, you know, a marriage of politics or something. And I find those to be a lot of fun to play around with. Plus, if you don't really feel like writing like a wedding scene, you don't have to, because it's like, oh, you just have to have them look at each other, then they're like stuck. Or you have to put them in a scenario where they have to somehow exchange energies or something, and they're stuck. And, you know, you don't have to slow everything down for a whole ceremony.
Wedding ceremonies can totally kill momentum. I don't know about you, but I'm like, my characters are rushing towards happily ever after, and they have to stop and do paperwork that just kills the mood for me.
It can be a buzzkill. And like, you know, if you're the kind of person like, no, I will totally own this, and Lord love you, but if you don't want to, then, you know, have it be a mating, fating, destiny, something or other thing.
But if you really like your world building and you've got that, a religious ceremony is a great way to break open that world and give it another level of what makes this culture work, what's valuable to them, how do they show bonds between people. I've had to write a few of them because they just were necessary for the plot. And it's always kind of interesting to think, well, am I going to just have them say words that are very similar to what we say in our regular ceremonies? Am I going to try to use a ceremony that's more from a different culture, or am I going to make something up? And you can come up with a lot of different ways to show that.
Yeah, and that can be a really fun way to, again, explore things and make it really come out of the core values of your culture, because how people view marriage and what they use to symbolize marriage says a lot about what your culture values as a whole. And that can be a really fun thing to show in your story. So that's definitely an angle that you can go for.
You know, like, does the father need to be there? Does it need witnesses? Is it handled by a priest? There's a lot of different questions you can ask. And plus, you can be beautiful and poetic on it too. It gives you a lot of chances to like really get into the character's brain about how they feel in that moment. Because if you're going through your own wedding, there's a lot of thoughts that go through your head.
Yep. Can be doubt, or in my case, it was, oh my goodness, I think that's one of the wedding party. It was a little 6-year-old boy who was turning somersaults on the front pew. So, well, at least he wasn't running through the ceremony, so that was good. But the whole time when all these things were happening, I was either, you know, kind of weirded out or thinking, and there he is again with his fish in the air doing other somersaults.
Yeah, I was pretty calm during my wedding because I'd been aiming for that guy for a while now, and I finally got him. But according to my mother-in-law, I do not admit that I did this, but she says that I went after he said I do. I was just so relieved, I guess.
It's kind of like, the master plan has come to fruition, right?
Everything I have carefully planned.
And the thing is, sometimes, you don't have time to get to a priest, or maybe your characters aren't particularly religious, or maybe a fate bond isn't a thing, and you go the legal route. And that's a great way to do it too. In Priceless, I have a very pragmatic character who, as soon as she realized there was a fate bond, she said, here is a 10-page contract. We're going through this so that I don't have to worry about you ruining my life. And that was that was what happened off screen. And that said a lot about her character and how she viewed commitment, but it worked.
Yeah, and a legal ceremony can just be a thing to get out of the way so that you recognize, because a lot of times a marriage can be plot important, especially if there's anything involved with inheritance or a hereditary crown that needs to be legal. That whole thing about the illegitimate son can't have the inheritance or something. So you might need to put that in there to prove a later point in your story. Maybe they need the legal ceremony so that she doesn't have to marry somebody else, because it can be a plot point. And if it is a plot point, you want to make sure that it's an unbreakable legal document with all the proper signatures, because if you don't check all those boxes, then you might have the plot going awry when it finds out that they're not really married, and it becomes a whole thing.
And then if you go political, then marriages are a very political thing. I mean, that's why in Fiddler on the Roof, the second proposal is, I would like to ask you a political question. And so the legal ramifications and everything surrounding the marriage could very much be a part of your story, whether or not there's love in there. As a song said, what has love got to do with it?
Yeah. And I think it really shows if you have the characters going through like the legal ceremony and they're just checking the boxes. One of my favorite things about my own marriage, my husband's in the Marine Corps, and at the time he asked me to marry him, and he's like, can we go to the courthouse this week and get the license so that I can go back to San Diego and get you on my paperwork? Because they wouldn't let him apply for housing until he had the license. And so I was like, okay. And he's like, oh, it won't be a real marriage. It will just be, the real marriage will be in the church in a couple months after we've got everything set up. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. It's not a real marriage. But they made him take vows at the thing, and it was so wonderful seeing how that hit him, that, oh, I'm going to have to say that. It was just like, it was so adorable. It's like, you could tell he took it so seriously. He's like, I didn't know we'd have to say vows. I thought we'd just sign a piece of paper. And it just hit him home, and he was so sincere about it and things. So you can even use something like a legal ceremony and have that lightning bolt moment for your character hit, that this is real. I'm promising something important, and I'm in. And I think that sort of emotional commitment can be shown through a legal commitment, because they're not totally separate things. With our society, a religious ceremony, a legal ceremony, an emotional bond, they're so intermeshed and mixed up and messy that you can't just take one strand and expect the others to stand.
Yep, agreed. And I think we've tackled everything we can tackle today. I know Heidnik could probably go way longer on this. Thank you so much for tuning in for this. What do we got coming up next week?
Well, next week we're going to have an interview with a mystery guest, and it's an exciting up-and-coming writer who I believe has his own podcast and a beastly series that he may want to talk about.
Oh, we're excited to have him talk about that. So make sure you show up next week for this awesome author interview. And thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Indie Book Magic with Janeen Ippolito and
H.L. Burke.
And if you want to throw down some love, give us reviews on iTunes. Go ahead and tell us what you thought on Facebook. Share our posts around social media. And in general, just tell us how we're doing. Have a fantastic day.